So we are talking about specifically boundaries,
Yeah.
self-care in regards to boundaries.
And I have to say, when we first put this out, we didn't know how it was going to go. But what's been really amazing is the energy that we get from you. So feel free at any time to speak up. And I think we're going to do a land acknowledgement right now. So as we are Pan-Canadian today, I'm going to read the slide. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral territory of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. We recognize the historic and ongoing impacts of colonization and are committed to decolonization of our systems and ongoing reconciliation, guided in our work by the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the TRC calls to action, the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls calls to justice, and the principles of empowerment and self-determination. The Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness is committed to equity, dignity, justice, and belonging. We are dedicated to serving equity-seeking communities as anti-racist, anti-oppressive, and inclusive allies. And I just want to add that I am here today in Chubuktuk in Mi'kma'ki, and I have the opportunity to live, work, and play here. As you are reflecting on this land acknowledgement, let us know where you're coming from today as well.
And I am joining us from Edmonton, Alberta, which is on Treaty 6 territory, the ancestral and traditional territory and meeting grounds of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, as well as the Métis.
Thank you.
So the CEH leads a national movement of individuals, organizations, and communities working together to end homelessness in Canada. And we are an organization that does a lot of things. Advocacy, our advocacy movements have been quite successful. Data and policy, National Conference to End Homelessness. Check that out. We're already in the planning stage. I think we're asking for presentation proposals.
Yes.
People can be registered now. I think the registration is opening up. So go and check that out. We would love to see you in Toronto on in November 2nd to 4th. We also have the allied networks the Rural and Remote Homelessness Network, the Women's Homelessness Network, the Canadian Lived Experience Leadership Network that we support, Built for Zero Canada, which supports communities across the country in developing high quality coordinated access and by names lists. And then, of course, the training and technical assistance of which Jody and I are a part that help communities and organizations end homelessness with expert training and technical assistance. The TTA is funded in part by the Government of Canada through the Community Capacity and Innovation Funding Stream of Reaching Home, Canada's homelessness strategy. And so let's talk about boundaries.
When we were talking last time, this was one of the topics that folks really wanted to discuss. And as we go through this, we're really going to talk about this from a number of different perspectives. Obviously, we're here today talking about professional boundaries and boundaries with clients, but not only client boundaries, but boundaries within your own professional life, from an employee perspective or an employer perspective as well. So really want you to think about this from a number of different aspects as we go along.
Absolutely. And I think that it's important to talk about good boundaries versus bad boundaries, but it's not an easy binary dichotomy, right? It is not as though these are all the things that have to do with all the things that have to do with good boundaries. These are all the things that have to do with bad boundaries, and we're just never the two shall meet. Because I think it gives people a big misunderstanding of what good boundaries are, right? Good boundaries, or we should say healthy boundaries, exist in this kind of space between porous boundaries and rigid boundaries, right? So for example, with porous boundaries, I think that that's what we usually think of when we think about bad boundaries, is that, people don't set boundaries. They don't they let people walk over them and those sorts of things. And that is certainly one aspect of having unhealthy boundaries. But realistically, there's also the other extreme, which is boundaries that are so rigid as to isolate oneself, right? Or to be impractical in day-to-day life or work. And
Detached.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I would say that, with porous boundaries, you might find that you're over involved with client problems. Whereas with rigid boundaries, you are so dogmatically set on setting that boundary that you actually don't allow anyone inside. You're unlikely to ask for help at work. You're unlikely to move beyond your job description. If you find yourself saying, that's not my job description, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Whereas with porous boundaries, maybe you're not ever setting, you're not looking at job descriptions. I remember a client, or I mean, a staff member who would finish work during a shift and then go out into the downtown east side and support people off shift. That is not healthy. That's very porous. Whereas we had other staff who 10 minutes before the shift ended, we're checked out already and we're not helping. So
Now, since we've kind of framed this, we will come back to this, to these slides, but I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, and then I'm going to reshare a Slido presentation. Okay.
And if you're just joining us, we are talking about boundaries today. Welcome.
Okay, so first things first is you can scan this QR code on your device right there on your screen, or you can join at slido.com and just put in that code 798677. I want to encourage everyone to go ahead and do that right now so that we can do this together. So remember, you can scan your QR code or just go into your browser and type in slido.com and then type in 798677. So we're going to start asking a few questions as we go. On a scale of 1 to 5, how good are you at establishing boundaries at work? We'll give people an opportunity to join on here. We looks like we have about 10 people so far that have joined in. We've got about 28 participants, so I'll give people a chance to hop on.
So the link is, there's a request to put the link in the chat. If you look at the slide, it's slido.com and it will ask you to put in the number 798677, or you can scan that QR code.
Yeah, just type in slido.com. It'll take you right there. Interesting. So some people rating a 2 or 3, but most people, I think they're pretty good at establishing boundaries, right? 72% of people who have answered so far, 68, 65, 62. Maybe I should have waited for a few more seconds. Okay. So 62%. Still, most people think they're pretty good at establishing boundaries. And there's about 1 in 10 of us that think that they're awesome at it. 57, 55. Well, as people are coming on, I think we are definitely changing up some of those scores. And with a median score of 3.6, interesting.
Interestingly, Quinn, we're seeing a number of people who are saying they don't have good boundaries as well. And that's okay. The honesty right now is what we're after. So
how often do you answer your work phone outside of work hours? Depends who the caller is. All the time, whenever it rings. Turn it off when I leave the office. Never. Once in a while when I think it's important. And only when clients are trying to contact me.
Depends on who the caller is. I'd like to dig deeper into that one.
About 14 responses so far. All the time, whenever it rings, 9%. Other, 9%.
I turn it off when I leave the office, so I never answer it. 35% of you are saying that, which is great, except for that it's only 35% of you.
Yeah, 1/3. Okay, let's keep going. How often do you check your work email outside of work hours? Well, I think that all the time whenever it rings should be all the time whenever it dings on your phone.
I turn it off when I leave the office. That's great. Just under 50% turn it off when they leave. Does that mean, when you answered that question, that you do not look at it over the weekend or your weekend, whatever that looks like?
Or vacation.
Or vacation. Quinn and I were, when we were doing this, we're talking about, and everybody here has seen it, the picture of the person that you work with checking their email and you can see their legs poolside.
Yeah, that's not a good picture.
Well, it's not a good picture for a lot of
For a
reasons.
lot
But
of reasons.
the biggest reason that it's not a good picture is that you're not actually on vacation.
Have you ever, have you ever accepted a gift from a client?
Fifty-fifty.
So far, about the majority have.
A pizza. Yeah. Do offerings count as gifts? That's a discussion.
Okay. Does the thought of taking a vacation stress you out? Yes, all the time. When we're real busy, I deserve a vacation, take it without care. Sometimes I just know there's going to be a pile of work when I get back. Okay. Sometimes. How often do you skip lunches or breaks? A lot of people answering lunch.
We only have 10% who are saying I never skip lunch.
Describe in one word how you are at establishing and sticking to professional boundaries. Porous. Great. Pretty consistent is not one word, but
Oh, Quinn. Open conversation. I'm interested in that one, open conversation. Does that mean that boundaries are an open conversation? And if so, I'd want to know more about that. Adamant.
I like the people that put meh.
Learning to establish boundaries, firm
Fair
boundaries.
enough. Fair enough.
Fail. Fail in caps.
All right. Do you fear reprisal for sticking to your boundaries? I know that can be tricky. I've certainly worked at place where leadership talked a really good game about work-life balance. And then if you insisted upon it, sometimes there'd be
an eyebrow.
There'd be an eyebrow raise. There'd be a comment here or there. There'd be little things.
A little microaggression for
38%. Yes. For those of you that are leaders in the communities, in your communities here, I'd really like you to internalize that.
And a real prop for the 63% who don't feel it, which
Absolutely.
is good.
How can sticking to good boundaries help your clients? Consistency sets example. Yeah. Model healthy behavior, clarity. Yeah. Role model, professionalism, know what to expect. No role confusion. Absolutely.
Safety. I think that one is huge.
Mm-hmm. Consistency and respect. Yeah. Safety.
Clarity.
Lead by example. Good. 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 All right, we're going to move on. How has having good boundaries helped you? Prevent burnout. Avoid burnout. Kept me safe, reduces pressure, positive relationship, professionalism. It hasn't. Interesting. Able to work with your client in a professional manner.
Connection.
Self-care begets more to offer others. Absolutely. Respect. Less overtime. Safety. Able to give clients self-awareness. Build healthy relationships. Build confidence. Okay, good. What is the most important thing about boundaries that you have ever learned? They matter. Yeah, fantastic. No one else will set them for you. Set them right away. Yes, I think that's important thing. Stick to them. Don't feel bad about setting them. They're so hard, but worth it. Motivates clients. Doesn't compromise your role. I am worth boundaries, and so are clients. No regrets. Some people will not like your boundaries. Yeah, absolutely. Doesn't mean I don't care.
Yeah.
Yeah. Peace of mind. Yeah.
Be consistent. Yes.
Absolutely.
Inconsistent boundaries are confusing for you and for everyone else.
Okay. Well, I'm going to stop share here and move this stuff over here. Okay. So we talked about all those different types of boundaries and what kind of impacts they might have. Those questions are not meant to be anything more than food for thought. But I did want to bring up, and I think Jody and I both wanted to bring up, that boundaries are contextual, right? So that the way that you set boundaries in one space is very different from the way that you set them in another space.
Yeah.
Right.
And our personal and professional boundaries might be different as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think that that's important to note. I think one of the comments we saw on the polling was, it doesn't mean that I don't care, right? Or it allows me to care, right? It allows me to have compassion. I think that's really important to remember. Boundaries equal compassion, right? Poor boundaries, whether they be rigid or porous boundaries, leads to burnout, of course.
Absolutely.
But every person that I've ever met in my life who is the most compassionate and loving people that I know had good boundaries. Because with good boundaries, it allows you to care. It allows you to be empathetic. It allows you to be with people in a way that's healthy for you. And so that you're not out there hurt, angry, pissed off, and taking it out on people without even knowing it.
Or just running yourself ragged,
Mm-hmm.
Exhausting yourself. Going home every night and worrying about the folks that you're working with rather than spending time with your family or doing the things that you need to do to re-energize yourself.
Mm-hmm. So I think I want to check in with people at this point and just say, what are some examples? Do you have any examples you want to throw in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and talk about them, of ways that you might set boundaries in one space that would be different than how you'd set boundaries in another space?
Or things that you've been doing in your organization to set boundaries that have really worked well. This is also an opportunity to share best practices. Everyone's got a real boundary about this today.
Yeah, it would depend upon the audience and the desired outcome. I see that, Carrie. Would you be willing to expand on that a little bit if you would unmute yourself? You don't have to, but we'd love to hear from you.
That's okay. Oh, no, that's not.
Hi, Sarah here.
Hey, Sarah.
All right, one sec. We got two computers going, so it's echoing. Okay. We were just talking. Well, we were talking about in the office here the difference between boundaries in the workplace with clients and with coworkers, and there's going to be some degree of overlap, but there's going to be a lot of differences as well. Mm-hmm. And it depends on like your professional obligations and just it's going to vary quite a bit.
Yeah, what kinds of things might be different when dealing with coworkers and work expectations and professional boundaries versus working with clients, do you think?
There are, I'm trying to think of some, but there might be even, let's say, personal information about yourself that you wouldn't share with clients, but you might talk about passively with coworkers.
Yeah,
that would probably be a big one.
Social relationships, establishing friendships with your coworkers.
Yeah, phenomenal. I think Carrie told us that they are typing frantically, but in the meantime, we're just gonna kind of move the conversation. Oh, Allison, you have a hand up. I'll stop share and we'll talk to you then. Allison? You have to unmute yourself.
I'm looking for it and looking for my hand lower. Okay. So another one could be, I had to learn about being underemployed, recognizing when I needed to also change employment because I stayed out of loyalty in positions where I was underemployed. And then that meant I was also underserving the place I was in, which led to other kinds of complications. And, so acknowledging my own needs as well in that way.
Allison, I was having a conversation with someone yesterday who was saying that they had decided that they needed to take a leave. And part of the reason that they needed to take a leave was for their own health, but they weren't going to do it because of the pressure that they'd put on other staff. And they were talking about the idea that they had been waiting for a promotion. They decided to pass it up because if they left the role that they were in right now, their coworkers would be left in a lurch. And so they weren't going to advance their own lives and their own jobs and their own well-being out of a sense of duty and obligation to the folks that they were working with on the ground, their coworkers. And that resonates with what you're saying. And I don't know if that hits what you're talking about.
I believe it's along the very similar lines, because anytime you're needing more, you're also not, I guess I don't have to expand too much, but that's very, very similar idea.
Yeah. We come into this work and we really care deeply. We're all, I think anybody who's on this call, I challenge anyone to disagree with me, but I think we all care. And we all care in ways that are so palpable compared to some of the folks that we live with or spend time with. They'll often say to us, I could never do the work you do. I could never devote myself the way you devote yourself. And so with that comes a sense that we can't let anyone down, ourselves or anyone else. And that can get toxic. That can get really exhausting.
Yeah, and I think that like Brene Brown talks about the difference between how people think of empathy and how it actually is, right? We often in this sector think of empathy as like feeling for someone, right? When it's meant to be feeling with someone. And you cannot feel with someone without a good boundary, right? Because you're not there for them. When you're feeling for someone, you're there for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Allison just made a comment. The insight that holding a position out of loyalty and obligation also denies another person who might need it and fill it gratefully. Absolutely, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great. So what kinds of things do you do to establish boundaries and confirm that you're operating within them, right? This is where we really want to turn it over to you, right? The strategic check-in about asking you to teach us about how you are good at boundaries, right? Right now, the majority of you have said during the polling that you're good at setting boundaries. Tell us about, let us learn from you. Let us learn. What kinds of things do you do to establish boundaries and confirm that you are operating within them? You can type them in the chat. If you want to put your hand up or unmute yourself, we'd love to hear from you. Please do so. And then I just want to throw this other question at you as well. Is this different in roles when you are in a leadership position versus a staff position? How do you establish boundaries and confirm that you are operating within them?
And I want to add just a supplemental piece to that. Are you operating within boundaries that are set in policy, or did you come up with these boundaries yourself? Because a lot of times we in this sector use policy as the default for our boundary rather than actually living within some kind of personal integrity to those boundaries. And I know, Quinn, no boundaries set in policy. No, does that say no boundaries are set in policy, or no boundaries set in policy, Cynthia? None are set
None.
inequality.
Yeah. Speak up and ask. Even established climates can adapt when recognizing need to change. Heather says, I work in a union environment, so we do have boundaries specifically outlined, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
That's good. Samantha, go ahead and unmute yourself.
And if something that I found to be helpful is sharing my intent to set and maintain a boundary with my coworkers and with my supervisor, like, assuming they're receptive to that. It can just be helpful to have someone else who's helping you keep that boundary and hold you to an account, in a caring way. I found that to be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And I see some more in the chats. Janine, as a leader, it is easier for me to set boundaries for myself and my staff when I was a staff than when I was a staff member. Definitely more pressure to perform for your supervisor, depending on their style. Absolutely. Culture filters from the top.
And boundaries are a privilege, aren't they? Right?
Boundaries are a privilege.
There is a real sense in some cases that I must do what I'm being told to do. And we can send really strange signals around things when it comes to boundaries. So if our supervisor says, don't worry, don't send, when you're off and your time is your own and you're home with your family, I don't expect to hear from you. And yet you get an email from them at 9 p.m. in an evening. So do I take my family time or do I respond to that email? Yeah.
Yeah. And speaking to that, like Anthony also said that I explain my role and limits. I ensure that I do this at the first meeting. I'm assuming that he's talking about with participants. And I was a big proponent of that on the front line. I would discuss what the program is going to do and what the program cannot do, what my role actually is and what I'm going to focus on. And in the first meeting, the second meeting, the third meeting, and we'd keep reminding over and over about those things so that we really could make sure that I was focusing on the areas that could have the most impact with the clients that I was working with. Yeah. So, and I just wanted to touch on what Jody just said, right? The leadership by example, right? Do as I say, not as I do, right? We have the example of the leader that says, oh no, absolutely. We want you to be completely cut off and take time all the time you need and so on. And then you get those emails at 3 a.m. or they're on vacation and they're still checking things and responding to requests and those sorts of things, which could unintentionally send a signal to everyone within the culture to say, oh, I expect this of you as well. Or at the very least, if you want to get on my good side, right? And so that is really, really important to be reflective of in regards to any leadership that you're doing. This is important if you want to think about this as in the context of case management as well. If you're working with individual clients, participants, community members, then the way you interact with them is going to give them an idea of the way they are meant to interact with you.
Yeah.
Right? Heather says, I've worked in union leadership at my work and now in non-union leadership at the same workplace. And I tell everyone to respect work boundaries to prevent burnout so we can all do our absolute best within our boundaries. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And setting those boundaries and sticking to them also really reinforces team camaraderie, making sure that you do your part to ensure that you're not putting other people under the bus when you stick to your boundaries or when they stick to their boundaries and you don't. Participants will know who sticks to the boundaries and who doesn't. And as a leader, are you supporting all staff equally to stick to boundaries? So I will absolutely admit, prior to becoming a parent myself, that I didn't see family as a valid reason to stick to boundaries back a long time ago. I didn't support parents to get to pick up daycare as well as I should have, without question, or looked at those kinds of things. So thinking about what it is that people need to be able to do their work, and respecting their boundaries for personal time or any of those other things.
Jade points out that using schedule send, where did I lost it? I use schedule send for email for work hours if something comes up outside of office hours. Yeah, absolutely. Depending on your settings, though, the email does still give the time that it was written. So just double check that. And Allison, gently but firmly remind coworkers of boundaries. How much or how little, sooner rather than later, for any requests or sharing of personal information. Absolutely. I think that was brought up during the poll too, and I think that's really, really important. Setting boundaries early is important, because if boundaries come up late in a relationship, they can feel like a judgment on that relationship to the other person, right? And so just laying out, this is who I am as a person, and I'm a person that has these boundaries, is going to be, I think, a lot more effective in the long run.
And Jade, I really appreciate what you've said. We've got another slide coming up that really talks about tips and tricks. And it's shocking to me how many people don't know that you can schedule a send for an email. So these are things that are so important, finding ways to make sure that you're still getting your work done. I mean, obviously, if you have an idea or a thought, it serves you well to get that off your mind, maybe by writing it down on a pad of paper or scheduling a send or doing whatever it is you're doing. But reinforcing that idea that our time off is our time off.
And Heather did point out that they would like to admit that they are sometimes also full of it, which is great. Logged into a work meeting this morning, even though I'm on vacation, but I wanted to feel caught up before my first day back, so I allowed it.
And you're here.
You're here.
Boundaries.
So let's talk tips and tricks. What things do you do to ensure that you are sticking to your work time? And do you have any productivity tips around boundaries?
Yeah, we got a few cases still. All right, we'll keep you posted.
Anthony, I'm guessing you're not meant to be talking to the rest of us.
Although Anthony is just, when Anthony is finished, he made a comment in the chat, and I wonder whether or not he'd like to speak to that, because I think it's a really good comment, and maybe he can share his thoughts on that.
Yeah.
Hello?
Hello.
Hey, Anthony.
Hi, could you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, sorry. Just still at work here, but I wanted to just touch base on, I saw the transition I had to make from a frontline staff member to now becoming a manager of my two programs. When I was a frontline, I made some close relationships with my coworkers, and we would often go out for dinners occasionally and just have a different relationship. But now that many of the team members are under my supervision, I've noticed that I had to have a different type of boundary with them, and I've had to separate that boundary, leaving our personal relationship outside of work. And when we could communicate, we can. But I've also had to be, at times, withdrawing myself from conversations that I'm hearing my team members having about a participant, or just different things that they may be struggling with in terms of policies and procedures. So it's been very interesting for me in this transition just to see how that dynamic changes when you are teammates, and then now you have to be a manager to someone that is close to you.
Yeah, I think those are very, very good points. And that transition can be tricky to navigate. So
Absolutely. Yeah. I've also gone through that, and knowing where those boundaries are, what sorts of activities can I engage in together. It can be tricky.
I've in this time I've heard the comment that I have changed from people who know me, right? Some don't mean it in any harmful way, but they've seen the shift that I had to make for my own growth now being a manager.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people have really paid attention to that.
Yeah. How many other people who are in a management position have heard that same comment? You've changed.
Yeah.
And in some ways it can be a compliment, and in other ways maybe it's not meant to be for that person who is feeling that shift in power dynamic.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, just a couple of things here as we kind of come near the end. I want to point out that the Working Mind training is available for folks, that it's something that we've been kind of talking about quite a bit. It's an evidence-based program designed to address and promote mental health and reduce the stigma of mental illness in a workplace setting. It talks about how to think about mental health in the workplace and support resiliency of staff members and leadership in the workplace, and really focusing in on the big takeaway for me in that training is certainly thinking about mental health as any other type of injury, right? A mental health injury. And we need to recognize, I think, that the work that we do is dangerous, right? It is equally as dangerous as being on a construction site or something like that. And workplace injuries can happen at any time. And so we need to be very, very cognizant of those things.
The Working Mind training is a training that can be taught or provided from the employee perspective as well as the manager perspective. And we do both of those trainings.
Mm-hmm. So as we come to an end here, I do want to ask about what area of self-care in the workplace would you like to see us focus on next month? And if you see someone provide the response you are going to provide, please provide it again. Just drop that in the chat. We really have been designing these things around what you guys have told us you want to have covered. So if you could throw any ideas you have for self-care related topics in the chat, that would be really, really helpful for us.
And as you're doing that, and as we go away today, what I'd really love for people to think about is how boundaries, not only how are boundaries important to you, but how have they shifted during this time for COVID? What boundaries look like for you if you are doing work from home or working remotely, whether or not you're going back into an office, and your own sense of safety around the new normal. And I don't know how else to say that other than to put air quotes around it and roll my eyes a little bit. But our circumstances over the last couple of years have changed, and we're doing this work in ways that we never expected to. Edwina, you're putting vicarious trauma in there as an answer, I assume, to the next self-care workshop. But I think of vicarious trauma when I think about boundaries right now and the work that we're doing and the way that this has shifted. So as you're thinking about boundaries, I'm hoping that one of the takeaways is just a good, healthy re-examination of what boundaries look like, because they look different now than they did 2.5 years ago. And as frontline workers or as leaders, can we take a step back and recognize that there is a shift and that there needs to be a shift? And what would that look like in workplaces? I encourage folks to have conversations with your staff teams and in staff meetings about what that looks like and whether or not it's changed and how it works for you, and what you need now. And is that different than what you needed a couple of years ago? Because as we've had these conversations about self-care and wellness in the last few months, what we've realized is that folks are hungry for this conversation. Mm-hmm. And there's a need for us to really revisit what it means to be healthy in this sector, and to recognize that it's hard right now. Yeah.
Remember that next week is Mental Health Week. The Canadian Mental Health Association is having a number of events. I would suggest that you go to mentalhealthweek.ca and check that out. I think it's going to be, you're going to have some good resources and very interesting things in there. So go ahead and check that out. I think that brings us to the end of our session today. There is our contact information. Oh,
I want to read out what Heather wrote. Heather mentioned emergency breaks, normalizing taking time out when needed, and how to regulate when we become dysregulated as part of our boundaries. I think that is so important to be able to say, I have to take a moment. Mm-hmm. And seeing that as a strength. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I did, because that's such a valuable piece.
Yeah, just let you know that that is our team's contact information. You can find us at all of those places and reach out if you have any other suggestions of what kinds of things you want to talk about. So, yeah.
And if something comes up after this this conversation, again, we are talking about things that are challenging. Feel free to reach out to us. If there's something that we can be talking about and you don't want to put it into the chat right now, you want it to be personal, maybe Quinn, could you share that contact information again, the slide with our email addresses?
I actually can. I just closed it.
Just closed it. Okay.
But our contact information is just over our shoulders as well.
It is. Look at that. Yeah, feel free to reach out to us and connect. If there's ways that we can support you in the work that you're doing, we really want to do that.
Good. Awesome. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. And just remember, it is okay to not be okay. And that is completely fine. Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much. Take care.